potential damage done by a bad prime minister is much worse than anything that a good prime minister can do. India's tragedy is its large size and its glorious history. There is never an existential threat to the country. People accept big change and potentially risky change only when the alternative is worse. When the Chinese incursions in Ladakh happened was when I think the bureaucracy woke up and realized that by viewing the private sector as a competitor, we were slowing down the economy. 40, 50 years back, the Chinese were actually comparable to us, or even behind.
Our guest today is Neelkanth Mishra. He is the chief economist at Axis Bank and one of India's most respected market strategists. From decoding India's growth story to advising global investors, he's shaping how the world views Bharat's economic future.
Sir, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. You've been one of our dream guests for a long while, actually. The way you explain all of these macroeconomic theory in simple terms that we can relate to is something that I really admire. So we're going to talk about a few different things like India's growth, the various levers, and how it impacts all of us. Maybe to begin with, when we talk about where we're headed, right, the direction, and so on, we talk about, let's say, GDP numbers, or we talk about consumer demand, we talk about, hey, we have the youngest demographic, so on and so forth. Is there a lens that you adopt that is more intuitive, easier for people to adopt, easier for people to understand in terms of, hey, are we headed in the right direction or not?
Yeah, no, first, thank you for having me on your show, and thank you for the kind words. To forecast GDP, I think it's important to first understand what is potential growth rate. Now, potential growth rate can be broken down into three parts. The first is what is the growth in the workforce? So how many people are working? So very often you will find that if there are more workers, there's more output. And the second is how much more capital is coming in. So what is the source of that capital? What is that capital being used for? Is this being used for creation of dwellings, construction of infrastructure, or construction of manufacturing output? So basically industry. And the third is total factor productivity. So what is the use of technology? It's as simple as using lighting, which is more efficient, as air conditioning, which is more efficient, cars, which are more fuel efficient, people doing work in a much more evolved manner, coming together much more cooperatively. Now, so when you look at GDP growth through these three prisms, the analysis becomes somewhat simpler. So, what is the number of people coming into the workforce? Is there a way that they can be more productively employed? And that itself becomes one input. The second is you look at inputs, rather, I would say the demand for capital, that is the deployment of capital. Now, most people think that corporate capex is a very important driver of demand for, but I think it's an outcome. The demand really comes from capital-intensive things like the creation of urban infrastructure, the construction of dwellings, the real estate cycle, the availability of export demand. So these are things that then drive entrepreneurs to take on risk, deploy equity and debt capital, and then build factories and build dwellings. And total factor productivity is about how you are allowing the diffusion of best practices. So there is something called a productivity frontier. So for example, if you are, say, setting up telecom infrastructure, if the productivity frontier is at 5G and going on to 5.5G and perhaps 6G in 5 years, if you are still going to be at 3G and 4G, then you are well behind the productivity frontier. In some, we are already starting to actually set the productivity frontier. So on things like digital public infrastructure, we are way ahead of the rest. So once you view the economy and the potential growth rate through this prism, the dynamics become a lot clearer. One last point on potential growth. So while you may be very far away from the productivity frontier, it's very important to understand why you are there. So what are the bureaucratic problems or bottlenecks that there are too many approvals needed? Can the government start stepping out of the way? Is the economy mature enough for that to happen? And so when I see workforce improvement, that is, there's a growth in workforce, the quality of the workforce is improving. It is not improving fast enough, but it is improving. We are seeing workforce participation ratios starting to go up. So more women are getting decent infrastructure at home, and time is getting freed up, and they're starting to spend 3-4 hours a day on work that is counted in GDP. I'm seeing the real estate cycle recover, and therefore the demand for dwelling construction happening. We need more demand. We see more demand for power, and there's a shortage of power capacity. So we need more capex there. So I can understand that the capital investment cycle is starting to recover. And then I see how the bureaucracy itself is changing, how the acceptance of private capital, of the partnership between the government and the private sector to grow the economy, is allowing for faster diffusion of best practices and technologies into the economy. So when I see this, while I would like to see India grow at 9-10% a year in real terms, I see enough in these for us to grow at maybe 7% a year in potential growth, I would say trend growth levels. Over this, you overlay the monetary and fiscal cycles, which can sort of pull forward and push out growth. And we should be in that 6.5-7% range for a while.
Right. Oftentimes when you talk to people in power, you understand that it's not as simple to kind of execute on some of these things, right? You've advised a lot of these folks. What are some of these invisible roadblocks that exist to make this happen?
So there's this book that two very senior bureaucrats wrote called Recalibrate, where they talk about their own experiences in the bureaucracy, at lower level bureaucracy, and then rising up to the higher echelons of power, highest echelons of power, I would say. And one of the things they talk about is the power balance between the cabinet secretariat and the prime minister's office. Now, the prime minister's office is called the fulcrum of governance. The cabinet secretariat is called the fulcrum of stability. So it's almost as if the bureaucracy thinks that their job is to be the sand in the wheels, the inertia in the system. Because remember that, so one way of interpreting that is that, see, we have a first past the post system. We have situations where the prime minister has not had his party or the prime minister has not had even say 50, 60 MPs. It was just a coalition and someone became the prime minister. Now, when they take the decision, is it really the will of the people? And the approach is that the potential damage done by a bad prime minister is much worse than anything that a good prime minister can do. So therefore, there are natural checks and balances instituted in the government. On top of that, there is a natural human tendency to cling to power. So over and above that, so let me first sort of add to the first part that, so there is a permanent bureaucracy which is very much part of the government. They know that the elected part of the government is temporary, and therefore they can easily stall. In any large organization, you'll find that large banks, even large, I would say, petrochemical refiners. So the moment, or even some of the older conglomerates in India, the bureaucracy and there are checks and balances which allow a large organization to work. And those checks and balances actually slow down the percolation of decisions and executive action. The then there is the division of power between the central and state governments. So there are many things like, say, on health, on education, on urban infrastructure, where the central government, even if it wants to, does not have, and rightfully so. I think the constitutional division of powers is, I think, very appropriate. But those changes need to happen at the state level. So there are only a few things that you can do at the central level. There are many things that you can do at the state level, but at the state level, you have similar issues. So, for example, we are all celebrating the high quality of infrastructure that Mumbai is now starting to have. So you can go from Worli, Lower Parel to, say, Nariman Point or the Gateway of India in 20-25 minutes. I mean, it would have been unthinkable just a year and a half back. With the metro rail coming up, we will, the things will improve dramatically further. Why can't we do this for 1,000 cities? And I think there is a problem of fiscal space, but I think the bigger problem is of governance, that the state governments are not comfortable ceding control to the cities. And it's a chicken and egg problem, meaning that there is justifiably fear and apprehension that if you give a lot of resources when the cities are not prepared to administer them, that there will be a lot of wastage, that there could be leakage, there could be corruption. And likewise, if you don't enable to do that, there is a problem of scale, that how many times can, say, a chief minister really personally intervene in the urban infrastructure development of a big city. You can do it for Mumbai, you can do it for Bangalore, you can do it for Hyderabad, but can you do it for 1,000 cities? You can't. And that's, so these are incredible challenges. And when you look at history, you realize that that there are many countries of this scale which have actually struggled to do this. And the reason why, say, for example, China has managed to do what it has is by taking significant amount of policy risk. That it was like, it is very comfortable to drive a car at 20 kilometers an hour because even if you by mistake turn it the one way, you can actually turn it the other way very quickly. If you're driving at 80 or 100 kilometers an hour on a bumpy road, the Chinese have been sort of taking those risks like one after another. And in a democracy, I think to have that level of risk taking is very hard. It's almost like, a politician who has worked very hard to gain power. We are asking them to sacrifice his own hard work or her own hard work in the interest of the nation, which some people are willing to do, but many aren't, very understandably. So this slows down change. And one last point is, there's a very strong human instinct to protect your own. And so there are issues with the judiciary, which acts independently. It should be independent, but if there are long pending cases, the denial of justice is like delay of justice is like denial of justice, and so there are many of these complex challenges which are, I think, not left to. So you may think that X person has become the chief minister or the prime minister, and therefore they'll be given all possible authority. But in a democracy, there are so many checks and balances that it starts to, or it is actually designed to slow down the pace of change. So that's why reform is very hard.
Yeah. So if you look at the Indian diaspora, right, we're some of the most successful, population groups across in the world. And so there is an argument to be made that, India's circumstances could be way better if we perhaps, discounting the baseline that we're starting in, right? There is something flawed at the design itself, which, you kind of like referenced in your previous answer, right? Which is this whole bureaucracy, which was initially meant to be, let's say, well-intentioned checks and balances, but now has become, what Mr. Sabarwal says, regulatory cholesterol, right? Slowing down things. Do you think that something like a Doge experiment here would work? It's not like it's worked fabulously well in the US, but yeah.
Exactly. So this is where even for Doge, the well-wishers of Doge are saying that, look, pick up a few points and drive them through. If you try to make too many changes in a very short amount of time, you will see a lot of resistance, and you won't be able to achieve much. And that's unfortunately what has ended up happening there as well. In India, yes, I think there are many changes that perhaps need to be made at the government level. So, for example, like consolidation of ministries. Why do we have 85 departments and 56 ministries, and when the US, which is 7 times our GDP, has 16 ministries? Why do we have a Ministry of Power, a Ministry of Coal, a Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, a Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, which looks at batteries, Ministry of Oil and Gas? They're all Ministry of Energy, and then we have joint secretaries manning them. And so the moment you try to do that, you try to consolidate, you have a lot of resistance about the reduction in the number of secretarial positions, reduction in the number of ministers, and how this whole structure can get done. The other very pertinent example is that it is undeniable that the value of central government holdings, which is say give or take 35-40 trillion rupees, can be much more productively managed. So, for example, if the market is very hot and there are strategically or sectors where the government does not want to be there strategically, there was a time where it wanted to be, but those have developed, like say steel or mining, where there are enough private sector competitors now or players now which can take over and do it much more efficiently. But and at the same time, when the market is collapsing, like what Hong Kong does, the government can step in and provide some stability, and in the process actually manage public assets much better. So you would dampen volatility in markets. So when there is a lot of demand for equity, you start supplying it. When there is a lack of demand, you start sort of creating that demand. And you do more strategic investments. So you don't want to own iron ore now, but you do want to own lithium mines or say uranium mines or whatever, right? So, and if those assets become available globally, you can invest in that. Now, when you, but this is much more easily done if you consolidate them under, one professionally managed organization. But try doing that, because every ministry will, fiefdom, and therefore they don't want to give it up. And so there is a lot of inertia in these things. So I think these kind of changes will be necessary, are necessary. The government has announced that they will set up a committee which looks at regulations which can be discarded. And frankly, this is a very steady and ongoing process, which is why I'm reasonably sure that total factor productivity growth can improve at 1.5-2% a year. It can and should grow at 4 or 5% a year, because we are so far away from the productivity frontier, and so we can accelerate, and perhaps we need to accelerate. But I'm not sure that that there is wide enough consensus for this change to happen. And one excellent point that a foreign leader made, they said that India's tragedy is its large size and its glorious history. So most of us in that room are saying, okay, so how is that tragic? And then he explained it with a very insightful comment. He said that, look, there is never an existential threat to the country. People accept big change and potentially risky change only when the alternative is worse. In India, we have reasonably good weather all throughout the year. We get lots of water. Soil is fertile. There is never this risk that India as a country is going to. And it is only when those things happen that big changes happen. So like, when the Chinese incursions in Ladakh happened, was when I think the bureaucracy woke up and realized that by viewing the private sector as a competitor, we were slowing down the economy. And the reason why China was so powerful was its economic growth, and therefore we need growth at all costs. So you will see that some of the brightest bureaucrats in the government today, and there are many of them now. So the joint secretaries and secretaries of today are night and day different in their approach, not in their brilliance, because the earlier ones were quite smart and intelligent as well, but in their approach and their acceptance of private sector as a necessary partner, and that the government's role is of an enabler and not a doer. I think those changes have been accelerated by the potential threat of China. when you see the US putting a gun to everyone's head and saying, negotiate the deal today, this is allowing the pro-reformist bureaucrats to push through the reduction in import duties, remove the protection, which was actually slowing down our productivity gains, by using that threat that the US is forcing us to do it, and we must, and in the process we can gain these concessions. So we have to then rely on some of these pressure situations where the pace of reform can be accelerated. And we have to be very careful in using these opportunities.
So these things can act like forcing functions for some of the things that we need to do anyway.
Yes.
Right? Okay. There is a thought that good economics is bad politics, right? If you're too fiscally conservative, you won't get any votes, right? Whereas on the opposite side, if you are a little carefree and, if you believe in freebies and distribute whatever resources you have, it can win you a lot of votes. I'm from Bangalore and Karnataka, and we are experiencing the wrath of some of this stuff. Do you see that attitude shifting, or do you think that it's something to look out for?
It's human nature, right? See, we all know that eating refined sugar is bad, but I can't resist sweets. And it's not that I don't know the biology and the problems that can create later, but I can't resist it, right? And so it's a human, it's in human nature to but there also is always cycles. So now that some governments have seen that, look, you gave the freebies, you got re-elected, but now what? You can't sustain it, and therefore the next time you're going to lose. So at least for one generation of politicians, you realize that there's no free lunch, that you can't just keep distributing freebies. So I don't think we can wish it away. But if you see what is happening in the center, it's actually quite remarkable that India is really an outlier. So when you see, say, China's general government deficit being at 10% of GDP and unchanged from COVID years. So remember that COVID years were very high, and then we were at, I think, 12%, 12.5% or so. And then because state plus center and minus whatever state gives to center, or center gives to states. And then that 9.5 at the center fell to 6.9, then 6.4, then 5.6, 4.8, now 4.4. This is a remarkable level of fiscal consolidation, which no country in the world has managed. We have continued to grow at 6.5%, 7%, despite the fact that we have consolidated so much. Because remember that a reduction in fiscal deficit is a drag on growth. China, US have struggled to do that. They've not done that. And therefore, the sustainability of their growth, or the costs of that growth, are going to hit them at some point. In India, on the other hand, we have actually managed to grow at 6.5%, 7%, despite very aggressive fiscal consolidation. In the process, the long-term costs of capital are coming down. The 10-year bond yield is at 6.2%. The last few times it was at 6% or 6.2% was during demonetization and during COVID. So in a normal period, for it to fall to these levels and likely headed down further is quite remarkable, because one of the biggest pain points for Indian entrepreneurs has been the cost of capital being too high, and despite this good economics and fiscal discipline, the government, by utilizing its resources much better and being much more responsible with it. So instead of approaching it as I am giving you freebies and I am the one responsible, viewing it as taxpayers' money, that I am the protector, or I'm actually the person responsible for deployment of this. I'm not the owner of this, and therefore I will be much more responsible with deploying it. By doing so, they've actually managed to affect individual livelihoods and individual households much better by giving them access to LPG and roads and electricity and piped water and so on and so forth. Now, so while the temptation to indulge in freebies of free power, free electricity, cash in the hands, Chhattisgarh spends 4% of GDP in just his paddy subsidies. So while that temptation is very high, I think it is possible, if one works hard, to manage to be politically prudent, meaning you don't create enemies by taking really tough decisions, but at the same time be fiscally prudent so that you leave space for the private sector to grow.
Right. China came up a couple of times, and of course the tariffs were mentioned as well. How do we become export competitive, right? In this world where, one visit to China, you realize that everything that has to be built is already built, right? They have entire bazaars full of, things that you can, you can go in from one end, come out with a product, the finished product at the other end, with all of those, 50 or 60 different parts that go into it at really dirt cheap prices, right? And with the speed of execution as well, right? So how do we become export competitive?
So we have to do a lot more of what we discussed. See, it is not that, 40, 50 years back, the Chinese were actually comparable to us or even behind. There are certain things they have done which we cannot do and should not do as well, like the concept of socialized losses and privatized gains. Because, when you want to accelerate growth, you want to accelerate capital formation. Now, GDP is wages plus profits. Now, what China has done is, it's a remarkable, I would say, policy innovation, that they put a lot of directed capital. So state directs that this industry, this sector will get a lot of capital. But they don't go after one company, because then that company becomes slow and monolithic and therefore, tries to, in fact, it becomes inefficient and it tries to exploit the system. You instead allow, as I say, 1,000 flowers bloom. So in one sector, you fund many companies and then they compete. And there's a brutal fight. And so the whole point is that profits are needed to attract more capital in a company. Basically, if you show you have EBITDA profits, you get debt. If you show your profits, you get equity capital. The state says in China that I can give you capital today. So you don't need to have profits. It's effectively like that. I mean, they don't state it like that, but that's how it's, because profitable.
But that's also because they're managing the currency also, right? And of course, their equation with the US and so on.
We'll come to the US thing, but within their biggest innovations have been inside the country. That their local governments get more than 50% of the resources. In India, it is less than 5%. So they have wonderfully managed decentralization. Because unless you are, as I said, the infrastructure improvements that are happening in Hyderabad or Mumbai, or to a large extent Delhi, if they can be done in, say, forget about 100 cities, I think India will be on a very different growth trajectory. So they have managed to improve infrastructure, bring down cost of capital. That's, of course, state intervention. And use this model that you will give a lot of loans so that capital formation happens, but you don't need to show profits. Now, this part we can't do, but what we should do, and we are doing, and we should be doing faster, is bring down the cost of capital. We should also improve ground level infrastructure. So the fact that you can travel from point A to point B in 20 minutes instead of 1 hour means that you can do more meetings, you can provide better services, and then the rest of the things start happening. So you think about like Tamil Nadu, the fact that 5 of the biggest shoe manufacturers in the world are now setting up factories in Tamil Nadu is that they have given land, they have given connectivity to the port, which are all 2 critical things, and they are willing to collaborate with the investors, the investing companies, which have global linkages. And if they want dormitories to be built, say for electronics manufacturers, the state government is willing to build them. So this level of partnership, where the state is willing to give you land, clearance, and all of that, is once you start doing that in, say, 5 or 7 different states, you don't need to do in all 30. I think India will start accelerating. So the solutions are not that complicated, meaning in terms of knowing what needs to be done. I think the challenge is in executing that, and you would, when I see how different, say, Tamil Nadu is, or even Karnataka, despite that the fiscal are guests that you talk about, but I think in terms of trying to attract foreign manufacturers and foreign service providers, I think Karnataka is doing a very, very good job. I think Andhra is not doing well. Now Maharashtra is finally, after 5 years of political uncertainty, is starting to hit again. So UP is doing an excellent job, but why isn't Bihar doing it? Why isn't Chhattisgarh doing it? Chhattisgarh is also trying to do a lot of things, but I think it'll take a lot of time for the state machinery to gear up to becoming a facilitator instead of a doer. So I would say that the pace of change, the political acceptability, the change in cost of capital is happening at a certain level, so we can keep growing at about 7%. I think to get to 9 to 10%, you need a level of policy risk, which, while I would like it to be there, I don't think it will be there.
Last couple of questions before we wind up. There is often this argument, especially on Twitter or X, that the growth, will it be driven by, let's say, cities? You pick about 20, 25, whatever number of cities, and you over-invest in them, or will it be more of a distributed growth, right? In this era where internet has virtually democratized information, access, all of those things. So should we look at large-scale infrastructure, connecting, improving access, and so on and so forth? So it's not just concentrated in the cities, but it's a little more distributed. I wonder where you kind of fall in either of these.
So I think that we need to do both. See, remember that we are a democracy, and we are also a precautious democracy. So we are trying to achieve what has never been done, which is become rich while being a democracy. See, most countries that have gone through this phase earlier have either been monarchies or dictatorships. So when South Korea, Taiwan, Spain, they were all going through this phase of development, they were effectively dictatorships. And the developed countries of today, of course, developed over 150, 200 years, which we don't have the time for. So we have to achieve in 50, 60 years what they did in 150, 200 years. So we have to grow 3 times faster. And which means 3 times faster capital accumulation, 3 times faster human development. A lot of these changes are, so for this to happen, you need political consensus. Now, if you start doing too much, so I think that cities are, if you manage your cities well, you actually attract a lot of talent. They all come together. In fact, there are many things you can do on Zoom. So, of course, I think integration is actually phenomenal. But there are many things that can actually happen only, we are all insisting now that come to office, which is that it's where, you see each other, there is serendipity, collaboration, learning. There's a lot of these services jobs are apprenticeship type jobs. So you need fiscal presence. And I think cities are extremely important. We need to manage our cities very well. We allow the cities to grow, keep real estate cheap, which is, I think, absolutely critical for not just job creation, but also the formation of capital stock, productivity growth. If you live in a comfortable house, it just significantly improves your productivity. So all of this is required. But if you allow these islands of productivity and therefore wage growth and capital and wealth accumulation to happen, the political conviction will die. Because what you need is not just that you grow the cities, but you provide opportunities, infrastructure, capital in the villages as well, hinterlands as well, so that they also participate. That inequality does not go beyond a certain point, because then the political conviction breaks. And then you have a phase where the political leadership has come in to destroy the system, like what's happened in the US. See, if you allow the disgruntlement to grow to a certain point, which has happened in the US, you see the election of a leader whose only job is to destroy the system, and then let the new system build by itself. So which is why I think both are important. Though I think our current challenge is managing the growth in urban infrastructure.
Right. We'll end with a quick rapid fire, as is the norm with the interviews, podcast. One economic principle that you think is past its sell date?
Manufacturing as a creator of jobs.
Oh, okay. Because of automation, AI, and all of this. Okay. A book or a thinker who kind of changed how you see India?
How I see India. No, so I actually see. I have found Seeing Like a State by James Scott. Actually, when I read that book, my understanding of government, the role of the government, and how societies form, like, completely transformed. So it's not a book on India, but it is about state formation, and I think it's completely transformational.
Right. Markets or institutions, which do you trust more?
Markets.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I'd love to do a follow-up sometime.
Yeah, absolutely, Roshan. Thank you for having me.
so much.
Thank you.